Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Connie.
And today we find ourselves at chapter 119 in the book of Tehillim. This is really a remarkable chapter of Tehillim for many, many reasons. I think I'll start out by pointing to the most obvious thing that stands out in this Tehillim, which is the length of the Tehillim. It is the longest chapter in the book of Tehillim, and it is the longest. It's really the longest chapter in the Torah. This chapter of Tehillim is 176 verses long.
Yikes.
So the fact that it's the longest chapter of Tehillim is only equaled by the quality and the content and the kavana put in, the intent put into this chapter of Tehillim by David HaMelech, by King David. If you remember, in the last chapter of Psalms, David HaMelech requested from Hashem, Pischu li sharei tzedek, open for me the gates of righteousness. And this chapter is really a continuation of that tefillah, of that prayer, because this chapter is dedicated to the request and to the appreciation of the gift of the Torah that has been gifted to us, to Bnei Yisrael. And that's why this chapter of Tehillim, this chapter of Psalms is something that once we've learned a little bit of a background to the Tehillim, and as we're going to begin to learn this chapter of Tehillim, it's something that we will really have a new appreciation for, and will cherish not only the gift of this chapter of Psalms, but the Torah, which is the subject of this chapter of Tehillim, of Psalms. In this chapter, we're going to see how David HaMelech, how King David prays to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that God should help him to know Hashem in all of his ways, and he expresses his desire to know Hashem, to know God, and that this will create a great strength for him and will be a great armor for him against those who seek to bring him down. So he asks Hashem, he asks God to give him success in this area of Torah study. Now, it's in as much as it's a request to ask Hashem to help us acquire Torah, to help us appreciate Torah, to help us to have all the benefits and the gifts of the Torah, it is also considered a hallel. It is considered a praise of the Torah. And that's why it's so apropos, and it makes sense that it follows on from chapter 118 that we just finished learning, which was part of the hallel, the songs of praise that are sung on the Rosh Chodesh and on the various holidays throughout the year. So now we come to Kuf Yotes, chapter 119. This is also a hallel. It's also songs of praise specifically praising the gift of the Torah. So if we are going to, when we're going to start learning this chapter, like I said, it's going to become cherished and it's going to become our friend. And in order to appreciate a friend, you need to take time and spend time with them. This chapter of Tehillim, we are going to spend, as we have expressed that it's a long chapter, so we are going to have the opportunity to spend much time with this chapter. Today, we may not even get into beginning the chapter. Today, we're going to talk about the chapter in general, an introduction to the chapter of Tehillim. But once we do start, one of the things that we're going to notice is that each verse in this chapter begins, it's divided into groups of 8, and each verse, starting with Pasuk Aleph, with verse number 1, for the next 8 verses, begins each verse with a letter of the Aleph base. So, Pasuk Aleph, verse number 1, begins with the word Ashrei, which is Aleph. Verse 2, Ashrei, an Aleph. Verse 3, Af, an Aleph, and so on, all the way through until the end of this chapter. So it's 8 letters, 8 verses, each verse starting with that letter. So that's why it's such a long chapter of Tehillim, because it's 8 times the 22 letters of the Aleph base. Now, the Perek, Rivkah, you have a question? No. Okay. Let me put you on. Okay. So the Perek hence has many names because of the depth of this Perek, of this chapter. It has many names. One of the names is called Alpha Beta. Alpha Beta, which is Aleph base, right? So it's called the Aleph base, and we understand why, because it goes through the entire Aleph base, each letter being represented 8 times. And we'll get into the concept of 8 as well. It's also called Alpha Beta Rabati, the great alphabet, because it's not just the alphabet, but it's 8 times every letter of the alphabet is represented. It's called Tamanya Ape Ba'alef base, the repetition of 8 Aleph base, and it's called Tamanya Apin, the repetition of 8. There are many explanations, many reasons given for this number chosen by David HaMelech to express himself in this chapter of Tehillim through the letters of the alphabet of the Aleph base, which these are the letters that the Torah consists of. The letters of the Aleph base contain great energy. We know the world was created with the 10 utterances of Hashem, which was through the letters of the Torah, of the Aleph base. 8 is a number that's greatly connected to Torah, which is what this chapter is all about, and is a number that is connected to us, to Bnei Yisrael. The Torah has 8,888 pasukim. So the number 8 we see over there connected to the Torah. 8 is also something that is connected to Bnei Yisrael. We enter into the bris of Hashem on the 8th day. When a bris is performed is on the 8th day. 8 also represents, the Me'am Lois brings down another reason for the 8-fold arrangement, that the 8 stresses the excellence of the righteous, of the tzaddikim, who walk wholeheartedly with Hashem by keeping the Torah. And the Torah is written, like we said, in the Hebrew Aleph base, and it's arranged in 8 ways. We're going to talk more about the way the Torah is arranged. The Torah includes chukim, mishpatim, edios, and mitzvahs, which are statutes, mitzvahs that we don't understand. Mishpatim are laws of civil laws. Mitzvahs, the commandments from Hashem, and edios are mitzvahs that are testimony, a sign, testimony to a specific thing. We're going to talk more about these things. So these are 4 concepts that that are brought down in the Torah. And if we think about these 4 in terms of learning the revealed part of the Torah and the esoteric part of the Torah, so now we have again the number 8. Others say also that David HaMelech, that King David passed away on Shemini Atzeres. Shemini Atzeres is the 8th day of the Yom Tov of Sukkot. So that's the connection to the number 8 as well. We are also, we spoke about 4 ways of looking at the Torah and doubling that for the revealed Torah and the esoteric parts of the Torah, but also as we're going to start learning the psukim, the verses, we're going to find there are 8 aspects of Torah that we're going to constantly see David HaMelech mention throughout this chapter of Tehillim. And what are these aspects? And there's 8 of them. So again, we find the dimension of 8 within the Torah. So the first Torah aspect is Torah. We're going to find even already in the first pasuk, Ashrei Tumimei Derech HaHolchem B'Toras Hashem. Right? We find this idea of Torah, which the Radak explains, the Torah's instructions regarding how the mitzvah should be done, how a commandment should be fulfilled. Torah means instruction. And actually, the whole book of the Torah, the whole Torah given to us by Hashem, is to instruct us on how to live our lives. We're here with a purpose, to make a dira b'tachtonim, to make a dwelling place for Hashem in this physical world. And the Torah, Milashon Hora'ah, is a book, is the manual, right? We came with a manual. If you use the manual, you will you'll live the best life that you can live and be able to carry out our purpose in this world. Other commentators say that Torah is a general term for all of the Torah, and it's a term that we use in reference to the Torah Shebechsav, the written Torah, and the Torah Shebal Peh, the oral Torah as well. The second expression that we're going to find and theme that we're going to find throughout this chapter of many verses is derech. Derech means a way or a path. So Radak says that is refining one's character traits by adopting the ways of Hashem. That when we follow the ways of Hashem, we live the way that Hashem shows us to live, like Hashem says, just as I am kind, you shall be kind. Just as I am merciful, you shall be merciful. That's the derech. That's the path on which we should follow. That's how we should live our lives. Other commentators say that it's generally talking about the mitzvahs, the commandments that guide a person on the path to refine their midos, their character traits. The third expression that we're going to find, by the way, we already have derech in the first verse, Ashrei to me my derech, but I'm going to point them out to you as we start to learn the psukim. The third thing is chukim, statutes. Statutes are mitzvahs, are commandments that Hashem did not reveal to us the reason for the commandment, for the mitzvah. We do it because Hashem says that is why we do it. Now, some of these commandments, some of these chukim have been revealed to those who can really delve deeply into the Kabbalah, the hidden secrets of the Torah. But for the most of us, there are mitzvahs that really are not mitzvahs that a human mind would come up with. I'll give you an example. That would be the mitzvah that in the Torah, we are told we are not allowed to wear a garment that is made up of the two materials, wool and linen, together. Like we're not given a reason. Hashem doesn't say there's a reason for it, but that we are not supposed to do that. And just to make it practical, if somebody buys a garment that there may be together wool and linen, this happens often with winter clothes. You know what winter is, ladies, yeah? Some places it gets cold and they have to wear coats or suits made of wool. Sometimes, especially in the more expensive ones, there will be in the facing or somehow in the fabric together with the wool, there will be linen as well. So how do we know if our garment has wool and linen? There are specially trained people who we take our suit to or our coat and we have it checked. It's called, in Hebrew, this mitzvah is called shatnez, that we look for shatnez. Shatnez is the mixture of wool and linen together. We don't understand such a mitzvah. It's called a chok. Chukacha refers to positive commandments. Chukotecha refers to negative commandments. So that's three. The fourth expression we're going to find here is mitzvahs. So a mitzvah, which we translate as a commandment, a mitzvah refers to any part of the Torah whose description uses the word mitzvah. This is your mitzvah, or this is the mitzvah. Zos mitzvah, this is the mitzvah. And it refers to both negative and positive commandments. Then we come to mishpatim, laws or judgments, which these are, as the Radak explains, the Torah's laws that govern human interaction, the laws of damages, etc. How to have a civilized people. And this can either refer to Torah laws or to the atonement, the punishment that atones for a sin. So now we move along to Adot. What are Adot? Adot are testimonies. Those are mitzvahs that testify to and commemorate Jewish values. For example, Shabbos. Shabbos is a testament to the fact that Hashem created the world in 6 days, and just as he rested on Shabbos, we rest on Shabbos. So Shabbos is a very important mitzvah for us to fill in. We just learning the first portion of Shema, the first paragraph of the Shema. One of the last mitzvahs in that paragraph is the mitzvah of tefillin. It is it's a sign, right? That's why the tefillin are worn. The mezuzah is a sign. Those are called ados, testimonies, and they refer both to the oral and the written Torah. Next, we come to pekudim. Pekudim are precepts, mitzvahs, the Radak explains, mitzvahs that are dictated by human logic as well as by the Torah. It's called pekudim. Pekudim also comes from the word a deposit, a pikadon, a deposit. Hashem has deposited this way of thinking in the human brain, that it is a Torah precept. This is, Hashem wants it, but he's sewn it into the DNA, into the brain, that we should also realize these kinds of things. And many commentaries say that actually this refers to tefillah, to prayer. And as we're talking along the lines of prayer, prayer is a mitzvah not only for Bnei Yisrael, not only for the Jewish people, but all nations in the world. Every human being has the mitzvah to daven, to pray to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And just as a note of interest, out of all the chapters of Tehillim, this Tehillim is specific to Bnei Yisrael. So I was listening to a shir given by a Rabbi Kaplan on this topic, on the subject of this chapter of Tehillim, and he said that once somebody came into a shul, I don't remember whose shul it was, and said that they had a dream that I don't even remember all the details, but they had a dream that they should pray, and they were told to say Tehillim, Psalms, as part of their prayers, but they should not say chapter 119. And they came to the rabbi of the shul to ask, what is that all about? So the rabbi explained to him what it means to pray and what they should pray. And it was just an interesting story that in that dream, the person was told not to recite chapter 119. The Torah, Siva Lanu Moshe Marasha Kehilas Yaakov, Hashem gave the Torah to Bnei Yisrael, and therefore this chapter is very specific for Bnei Yisrael. Tzedek is righteousness, and righteousness is justification of the mitzvahs, demonstrating their righteousness. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, sorry about that interruption. So tzedek is righteousness, we said, justification of commandments, demonstrating their righteousness. And those are mitzvahs that govern human interactions. And we definitely know that it is vital that mitzvahs governing human interaction are not only a result of human thinking, because that can go awry. We've seen that time and time again in history. It needs to be rooted in Torah. It needs to be rooted in godliness. If it's left to the human mind, chas v'shalom, God forbid, it can really go awry. And then we come to dibur and amira, statement and word, which also includes Hashem's promise. So according to Radak, it's the general terms that include all the mitzvahs, because those were given over b'dibur, with speech, and also Hashem's promises. And in addition, Radak says it's Hashem's will in creation, what Hashem wanted, why he created this world. And the commentaries say that dibur, speech, refers to the Talmud, the Gemara, wherein God's speech is properly expounded and clarified. So we have the Torah, which is the word of Hashem, but that word needs to be expounded, it needs to be explained, it needs to be clarified, and that is done in the oral Torah. And Amira refers to, from the word Omer, to say, refers to the secrets of the Torah, the Kabbalah, the mystical parts of Torah. And lastly, we come to Emunah. Emunah is faith, truth, trustworthiness, and this, the Radak says, is the fulfillment of Hashem's word in creation. So these 8 concepts, these 8 ideas, these 8 truths are going to be found within these 8 eights. With every letter of the Aleph base, we're going to come back to these 8 concepts, which is really what the Torah is all about. And the number 8 also corresponds to the 8 means by which wisdom is acquired. So we're talking about the Torah. What is Torah? Torah is Chachmas Hashem. It's God's wisdom. How do we acquire Chachmas Hashem, God's wisdom? With 8 things. So what do we have? What are the 8 things? We have the 5 senses, which is the sight, smell, touch, hearing, and in addition to that, it's the information acquired from teaching, from teachers, extrapolation, as we said, that's what the Talmud does, and faith, emunah. We need all of these in order to acquire the knowledge of the Torah. The number 8 also corresponds to 8 elements of the self, which are the 5 senses and the 3 elements of the spirit, which are growth, desire, and intellect. So by repeating every letter of the Aleph base with 8 verses for each letter, David is hinting to his desire to commit every element of his being to Hashem, to the service of God. And that's what life is all about. Life is about growth. Life is about refinement. And it's a journey. We're all on this journey. The number 8, as we said, is a special number. So 7, the number 7, we connect to completion. Hashem, we have the cycle of a week is 7. Hashem created the world in 6 days. He rested on the 7th. That is within the confines of nature. The number 8 represents the miraculous, that which transcends the order of nature. And therefore, this chapter is, as we said, connected to Bnei Yisrael, because through our attachment to Hashem, through our attachment to God, through the Torah and through its mitzvahs, we connect to that concept of 8. And that's why we find the number 8 is a very relevant number to Bnei Yisrael, to the Jewish people. So what I'd like to do also now is talk a little bit. We know that this is a very, very special chapter of Tehillim, and we're going to get to know it and to understand it. I want to also first talk about the customs connected to this chapter of Tehillim. There are many unique customs related to saying chapter 119. We know that when a person is having a health issue or a person is in some kind of danger, this is the go-to chapter. How do we use this chapter? What we do is we take the name of the person and we recite all the letters connected to that person's name. So let's say a person's name is Adam. That's Aleph, Daled, Mem. So one will recite first all the verses with the letter Aleph, then all the verses with the letter Daled, then all the verses with the letter Mem. Then, if it's a boy or man, one says Ben. If it's a woman, one says Bat. So Bet and Nun, all the verses with the Bet, all the verses with the Nun. And then the mother's name, whatever the mother's Hebrew name is, one will recite all of those. And it continues. We also recite the words, the verses that correspond to the words Kara Satan, which is Kuf Reish Ayin, tear away, Satan, the Satan. And we do it in the same way. So all the verses with Kuf, with Reish, with Ayin, with Sin, with Tet, and with Nun. It's also customary at a memorial service that one will do the same by spelling out the name of the person, and also instead of Kara Satan at the end, the word Neshama, Nun, Shin, Mem, He. So all the letters with those with the word Neshama. Now, given the greatness of this chapter of Tehillim, the Chidah said that people should make a point of reciting Kuf Yud Tes, this chapter of Tehillim, every single week. That within the week, this chapter should be recited. And there's different customs as to how this is done. So some people will say it at the mincha of Erev Shabbos. Some people will say it at the mincha on Shabbos. It's not included in the Siddur because it's so long. So one would just go to the Tehillim, to the book of Tehillim, and recite it. And the way it's done is that each day, different verses are said. So on Sunday would be Aleph Beis Gimel, Monday, Dalet Hey Vav, Tuesday, Zayin Ches Tes, Wednesday, Yud Chaf Lamed, Thursday, Mem Nun Samach, Friday, Ayin Pei Tzadi, and on Shabbos, 4, Kuf, Resh, Shin, and Taf. And And it's a very, very powerful Tehillim. I don't know if you remember, but we had mentioned that the Ashrei also has within it all the letters of the alphabet, besides the letter Nun. And the sages commented that one who says the Ashrei every single day will be greatly protected and rewarded. And there was a discussion amongst the sages whether this chapter of Tehillim would, because of its greatness and because of its containing all the letters of the Aleph base, maybe that would be sufficient, that this chapter should be said daily. But actually, the practice, the way we do it is that we don't replace the Ashrei with this. And that's because within the Ashrei is contained the pasuk, the verse, Poseach es yadecha o maspia l'chol chayrot, sign that Hashem opens his hands and provides for all of mankind. That verse alone is, we know it carries great weight, and so we don't replace the Ashrei with Kuf Yotes, but it is a great segula to recite this chapter of Tehillim throughout the week, at least once a week. There are those who say that initially, actually, this was recited at Tikkun Chatzos, those righteous souls that would wake up at midnight to pray to Hashem would say this chapter of Psalm. So it's a exceedingly powerful chapter. As it happens, Hasidim have the custom to recite the Tehillim of their Rebbe every year. This year, the chapter of Psalms for the Rebbe is chapter 119. And because of this, there are actually apps that have been brought out by various organizations that can be downloaded onto one's phone, and special cards with this chapter of Tehillim. Because it's such a long chapter, it's a good thing to have, that one can spread it out and have it easily handy in order to recite the entire chapter by the end of each week. Although the way that it's done in terms of the custom of the Hasidim is that every single day this chapter of Tehillim is to be recited. So we know that when we do a good deed for ourselves, it doesn't just impact ourselves, but everybody in the world benefits from those tefillahs, from those prayers. The Rebbe did mention that he mentioned in a Farbrengen that those who participated in the custom of learning the daf, the daf yomi, that they should finish the entire Talmud in the year, should be scrupulous in this custom of saying chapter 119. And he said, even though this isn't a custom that we see, that it's so prevalent, but he mentioned that he did see his father say this chapter, I believe it was on Shabbos. Every Shabbos his father would recite this chapter of Tehillim. The Chida mentions that during his lifetime, the custom was that the children would be brought into shul at that time to hear the Tehillim, so they would learn these verses of Tehillim, and it would be something that they could always go back to, given that it was such a strong tefillah, such a strong prayer. I also noticed something as I was cruising the internet, that there is as well, there's a beautiful website where you can hear someone singing to Hasidic Nigunim all the verses of this chapter of Tehillim. Singing is a very good way to learn things by heart. You know, sometimes it's hard to learn things by heart, but when you put things to a song, it makes it much easier. I did not write down that that website. I don't think so, no, but I will look it up again and get that for you, because it's a nice thing to have as well, even as you're reciting the chapters yourself, that you should be able to go into this website and listen and sing it as you are saying the chapters of Tehillim. It's a beautiful thing to have. So so we see that even the children were brought in to learn this chapter of Tehillim by heart. And I think we can all agree, when we learn things when we're younger, they stick with us. It's much easier to learn things. I remember things that I learned, the good and the nonsense, from when I was much younger. Today it's much more difficult for me, but just because it's more difficult doesn't mean that we should give up. We should find every avenue possible, and music is a great way to put together to davening, to prayer. And so one of the things that we're going to notice also, very interesting, is Hashem's name is mentioned many times in this chapter of Tehillim. The only name we find mentioned in this chapter of Tehillim is the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, the 4-letter name of Hashem. I think it's mentioned 23 times, if I remember correctly. But it's interesting that that is the name of Hashem that is used in this chapter of Tehillim, and not any other name. So one of the things that's interesting to note when we talk about a name that is used is not only to identify a person, but actually the way that the person's name is used can also tell you a lot about the relationship between the two people involved. So, for example, if you have a nickname, those people who are close to you might call you by that nickname, whereas others that don't know you that well won't use that nickname because they don't know you well enough. They probably learned about your name from your official papers, or there's not that familiarity. Sometimes you can pick up a phone, right? Your phone rings and you're not sure, you don't recognize the number. Should I pick it up? Should I not pick it up? And in the end, you decide you're going to pick it up. Maybe it's important. And as soon as they say your name, hello, Mrs. Bukite, right away, what do I know? I know that this person really most likely is calling to sell me something, because they don't even know my name properly. So a name and the way a name is used is very telling about the relationship between two people. This name that is referred to in this chapter of Tehillim, over and over and over again, the name Yud Kei Vav Kei is the special relationship that's shown between the Eibishter and Bnei Yisrael. And this really, this chapter, as we're going to go through all the psukim, all the verses of this chapter, we're really going to gain this appreciation of the specialness, the uniqueness of this chapter of Tehillim. So it has both these concepts. It has the concept of Hallel, of praise to Hashem for the Torah, and it also has the koyach, the strength, where we ask Hashem to bring that Torah close to us, to make it dear to us, to help us not only to learn the Torah, but to adhere to the precepts that are found within this Torah that Hashem has given to Bnei Yisrael, given to the Jewish people. So let's begin. We have a few minutes left. Let's begin. Let's look at, let's open the gates, as David HaMelech said, Pischu li sharei tzedek. Let's open the gates of righteousness, and let's look at the first, well, we'll begin to look at the first part of this chapter of Tehillim. We're going to start with the Alephs. So the first word here is Ashrei. Ashrei tamimei derech haholchim b'toras Hashem. Happy are those whose way is integrity, who walk with the Torah of Hashem. So Aleph, so let's look at this letter Aleph. I don't know, some of you might remember, we did a journey of the whole Aleph base. It's been quite a few years, but every letter of the Aleph base has so many beautiful things to understand about it. The name of the letter, the shape of the letter, the meaning of the letter, the numerical value of the letter. So the letter Aleph means a head, like a captain, someone in charge. It also means to study. So so the letter Aleph signifies the intellect. What we're going to see is that these verses that begin with the letter Aleph are mostly about keeping the Torah and its precepts. And just as David HaMelech began the entire book of Tehillim, the very first word in the book of Tehillim is Ashrei, so too he begins this perek, this chapter, with the word Ashrei. Happy are they who walk in the way that brings one to completeness and to integrity, and not, God forbid, to condemnation. Who is that? Haholchim b'toras Hashem, one who walks with the Torah of the Lord. You know, it's so interesting. We live in a world where everybody is chasing this concept of happiness. It's a multi-billion, trillion, gazillion dollar industry. Everybody is chasing this elusive happiness. But I think the first thing one needs to do before they chase something is to define really what are they looking for? What are they searching for? I should give a plug here for the Rosh Chodesh Society that we are learning this year, which is called the Code to Joy. You know, there's many feelings that a person has when they're having an experience in life, and we throw around words: joy, happiness. What is the word ashrei really mean when we say happy are those whose way is integrity? This kind of happiness is a kind of happiness that is really part and parcel of one's psyche. It's a kind of happiness that allows a person to sleep at night. It's the kind of happiness that allows a person to go about their day with a calm, with a peace. And how is this happiness that really everybody in the world would like to have? How is that happiness found? So David HaMelech tells us over here, happy are they whose way is integrity. Meaning that this person who can use this expression of ashrei in their life is one who is God-fearing. Now, it's interesting that at the outset of this chapter of Tehillim, at this chapter of Psalms, that David HaMelech makes reference to Yiras Hashem, to fear of God from the get-go, as he's talking about the concept of Torah in general. And our sages have taught that anyone whose fear of God precedes his wisdom endures. It's very, very important for us as we embrace our relationship with Torah, that we bring along this concept of Yiras Shamayim, of fear of heaven. When a person lives with integrity, when a person lives with Yiras Shamayim, with fear of heaven, that allows a person to have a way that is a way of integrity. That allows a person to be kept further away from sin. Shlomo HaMelech says, the just man walks with his integrity, happy are his children after him. Meaning, why are his children happy? His children are happy because their father chose the way of integrity. So this is something that that every one of us has to work on. It's a work in progress. It's something that we can spend our whole life trying to accomplish and to integrate this Yiras Shamayim, this fear of heaven. And there's no better way to do this than to study Torah. When we study Torah, when we learn Torah, we become wholly bound with Chochmas Hashem, with the Chochmah, with the intelligence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of God. But if we want our Torah study to be everlasting, it has to be preceded by Yiras Shamayim, by fear of Hashem, by fear of God. It says that when a person, the Me'am Lawyers brings down that when a person walks with integrity, Hashem chooses him and his worship. And it says in the Torah, he that walks in a way of integrity, he will minister to me. And it says you will be upright with the Lord your God in Devarim, in the Torah. So if a person wants to merit to be in the company of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the company of God, the way to do it is Haholchim b'Toras Hashem, to walk with integrity, to base all one's actions on the Torah. And as we are reciting this chapter of Tehillim, which we said is called the chapter of the number 8, right? It's the 8, the idea of 8. We remember this concept of 8, that we want to be completely bound up with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with every single part of our beings. So we really just started an introduction to this chapter of Tehillim. We're going to continue in Mitzvah Hashem, going through the letters of the Aleph base and becoming very close to this chapter of Tehillim. But we don't need to wait until that point to begin to get connected to the words in this perek, in this chapter of Tehillim. They are very, very powerful. They are very potent. They bring great protection. They bring great bracha. They bring great connectedness to us and to our Father in heaven. And God should show us his love in a very revealed way and answer all of our prayers, especially the prayer that he should reveal himself. And that will be with the redemption. It should be speedily in our days.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
I just want to remind everyone that this Wednesday evening in Mitzvah Hashem, we are going to have a beautiful Tu B'Shvat Seder. If you haven't thought about getting a box to be able to join along, you can still do that if you call the office. And even if you don't manage to get the box, but you have some of your own fruit, there's going to be a beautiful Seder presented by my husband on Wednesday evening on his Zoom number. And I invite everybody, encourage everybody to be a part of it. It's very, very beautiful, and actually very much ties in with what we're talking about today, because as we go through the Shiba Minim, the 7 fruits of the land of Eretz Yisrael, each one represents a different facet of our midos, of our characters, which really what is our life all about is about refining and working on them and becoming more godlike every single day. And it's important for us to remember that Rome wasn't built in a day. Just because we haven't reached perfection today doesn't mean that Hashem doesn't recognize every step. It doesn't matter how small or how large it is, that Hashem appreciates that, and the world appreciates it, because every step we take to become more godlike and to refine our natures brings more light into